This is WNUT Talk on the WNUT Radio Network. Welcome to WNUT Talk. This is Brandon, hanging out here in the WNUT studio. And, on WNUT Talk, how we like to do things is basically just pick a topic and, educate your punk ass for close to an hour, or sometimes ramble about something that's been on our minds, or deep dive, explore a subject that I'm particularly fascinated with. Hell, you never know sometimes. And today, let me tell you, we mentioned this on the last episode. Me and Paul from Connecticut, we were doing another round of 6 degrees of classic metal using Whitesnake. And that dude's good, man. He can take any band I throw at him, and he can just follow the members back to Whitesnake. And Black Sabbath and Rainbow and Deep Purple. So anyway, check that episode out, and the one that we did before, episode 13, I believe, if you're intrigued and you want to hear more, because, man, it is fun to listen to. But we mentioned on that episode doing something called Superstar Slumps, and I have got a few bands to explore today in the Superstar Slump arena. And then I'm actually going to bring my homie Paul from Connecticut back in at the end. We're going to talk about a few bands that he and I are both pretty passionate about. So I got a good program for you today. A lot of music history here, a lot of kind of obscure shit going on, and I'm going to be uncovering a bunch of albums that maybe you've never heard of before, maybe you've never listened to. Certainly a good bit of people have never listened to some of these, according to the numbers I found. But hey, Superstar Slumps, what we're talking about today, we're talking about troubled phases of the careers of iconic bands. I'm talking big name bands that are household names, not necessarily bands, just, groups, acts, musicians. Hell, I got Run-DMC on here, for example, so that's not really a band, but you see what I'm saying. Think of these as some of the lesser traveled areas of the musical map. Some people might love these little slump areas that I'm going to be talking about, but most fans don't go there, and the terrain is not very well known. You will see what I mean. Now, there's certain groups that I'm not touching. We got ones that put out all killer, no filler. I'm talking about your AC/DCs, your Alice in Chainses, your Sir Mix-a-Lots. That's right, you fucking heard me. And so, hey, say what you will about AC/DC, say what you will about some of these bands. These are bands that, for the most part, fans and critics and pop culture alike do not really say, hey, there's a shitty phase of this band's career, or this is an album that people don't listen to. Then you got bands that really only put out 3 or 4 albums, and we're not looking at those because that's not really a fair undertaking. Like your Nirvanas, your Guns N' Roses, the ones that just put out a few and then their career was basically done. There's not enough there to really work with. You'll see what I mean. I'm getting into bands that have expansive catalogs here, but pretty much everybody else is fair game, except for maybe the Eagles, because the entire catalog sucks. Yeah, I said what I said, but hey, to start us off with, and listen, I can take it as well as I can give it, because I'm going to start talking about a band I like. And sometimes it is a lonely road to walk being a fan of this band. I'm talking about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It is not always easy being a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, especially not since the 90s. The Red Hot Chili Peppers put out 4 albums back in the 80s, released by EMI Records, starting in 84. Very cool sound, man. Very different kind of funk rock that not a lot of people had ever heard before. And these albums and these songs that they were recording were not really well known. People didn't really know this band. They were not aware of these albums coming out. And these albums didn't start charting until the 3rd album in 1987. That was called the Uplift Mofo Party Plan. And the 4th album, Mother's Milk, is what really began the Chili Peppers trip to kind of stardom, because that's the one where they did the Higher Ground cover, the Stevie Wonder song, and they had kind of a harder edge to the music, thanks to the new guitarist John Frusciante, who replaced the late Hillel Slovak, who had died in 1988. So Mother's Milk starts to kind of get them a little bit more exposure, and then they break out into superstardom in 1991 with Blood Sugar Sex Magic. That was the first one on Warner Brothers Records, produced by Rick Rubin. We're talking 7 times platinum. This is the album that had Give It Away. This had Under the Bridge. This had Breaking the Girl. This is where the Chili Peppers hitched a ride on the rocket ship that, put them up there with your Soundgardens and your Guns N' Roses. I mean, they were featured at festivals. They were headlining their own tours from this point on. They were filling arenas for the first time. The only problem was that guitarist I just mentioned, he'd been with them a few years now, John Frusciante, he didn't cope well with that success. he liked it better when they were playing clubs, when they were playing smaller venues. He had begun to struggle with a drug problem, and he wound up leaving the band in May 1992. So the band recruited Dave Navarro, who had formerly played with Jane's Addiction. And with Dave Navarro, they began to work on their fifth album, which would eventually be called One Hot Minute, and it came out at the end of summer 1995. Now, this is the only album the band made with Dave Navarro, and the sound was a little less like the pure kind of funk-infused rock that fans had come to know and love with Blood Sugar Sex Magik. And since that was their breakthrough album, that was the only album a lot of fans were familiar with at that time, unless, like me, you started going back into the 80s part of their catalog and buying all those. But hey, when it came to just those two records back to back, yeah, it was a bit of a departure. It was a little kind of a sharper turn from what people expected to hear. And in my opinion, it kind of sounded a little more like the Mother's Milk stuff. It was like a little harder edge. It had heavier riffing and stuff like that. So in the fall of 1995, though, the One Hot Minute album was huge. Singles like Warped, My Friends, and Aeroplane, those would chart over the next several months, and they were played everywhere. All the alternative radio stations. MTV was playing them all the time. The band was plastered all over music magazine covers, festivals, late night talk shows. This was a very successful and very well received album. But Anthony Kiedis would relapse into drug use around that time after 5 years sober, and the subject matter that he had written about on the album was a bit darker as a result of that. Plus, ultimately, the band were just kind of musically from other worlds than Navarro was. So their songwriting approaches were different from his, their influences were different from his, and their styles and vibes were ultimately very different from Dave Navarro's. So by early 1998, the Chili Peppers had announced that Navarro had left the band. And this was actually one true case of a mutual decision that was confirmed by both parties. And by that summer, John Frusciante was back in the band. And they started working together on the very strong and huge hit album Californication that would eventually come in 1999. So what became of One Hot Minute? That's the thing. A lot of people listening to this might not even know that album is a thing, because today the band treats it almost like an album made by another band that some of their members just happen to be in. They don't play the material live. They sometimes tease some of that music live, but Flea will perform the song P just about on every tour because it's basically a solo song by him. It was presented that way on the record, but that's it, with the exception of Aeroplane, which only was played for a few years in the late 2010s because Frusciante was out of the band again, replaced by a guitarist named Josh Klinghoffer. And Klinghoffer really loved Aeroplane, and he wanted to play it, and the band was like, yeah, we'll do that. So from like 2016 to 2019, Aeroplane was in some of their set lists. Once Frusciante was back in the band, they didn't play it anymore. And by the way, the first album they made with Klinghoffer, called I'm With You, is one of my absolute all-time favorite Chili Peppers records. That shit is amazing. But anyway, so as you can see, longtime guitarist John Frusciante seems to be the hang-up here when it comes to the One Hot Minute album. He actually once said he's never listened to that album, and that hearing it would be like seeing your girlfriend with another guy, according to him. Not only that, but the drummer Chad Smith said in an interview in 2014 that, quote, "We don't really feel that connected to that record anymore. No special reason, not to say we'd never play those songs, but we don't feel that emotionally connected to that music," unquote. So I think it's a phenomenal album. Me, Brandon, talking to you here on WNUT Talk today, I love the harder rock and the metal edge and the guitar work, and I think it's still plenty funky enough to stand beside the rest of their catalog. I think of it kind of like a companion piece to Mother's Milk in some ways. I love those two record sounds. It's just wild to think how, as time went on and they mentioned that album less and less, it became almost an unknown album today. But it was a double platinum juggernaut when it was released. You kind of really had to be there. So One Hot Minute, that was the little superstar slump for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. That's an album in between Blood Sugar Sex Magik and Californication that a lot of fans just don't even know exists anymore. What the hell? So that's what we're talking about today. And I mentioned earlier Run-DMC. And let me tell you something, when it comes to the 1980s, there were very few acts in hip-hop who owned the 1980s quite like Run-DMC did. In fact, it might be safe to say nobody did. The Beastie Boys were getting there, but they were relatively new on the scene. The Fat Boys had a similar build to their platinum status, but they wouldn't survive the transition into the 90s, both figuratively and literally, because we lost the human beatbox in 1995. But Run-DMC started with a gold album. Debut album went gold. The next 3 albums were platinum, up to and including 1988's Tougher Than Leather, had hits like Mary Mary and Run's House. But here's the problem. The same year that Tougher Than Leather came out, 1988, so did NWA's Straight Outta Compton, followed by shit like Eazy-E's Easy Does It album and the DOC's No One Can Do It Better. And rap was changing, and artists like those guys and Public Enemy, Ice Cube had just gone solo, even the very raunchy 2 Live Crew, they were not pulling the kind of punches that Run-DMC used to pull in their lyrics. And hip-hop was, man, it was getting tougher. The attitude was getting harder, and Run-DMC did not epitomize that maybe like some of the newer folks on the scene. Plus, when you look at sounds that were getting really big in clubs and on the radio around that time, New Jack Swing was starting to emerge. Artists like Bobby Brown and New Edition, Keith Sweat, Tony. The New Jack Swing was kind of the sound that epitomized this new class that was starting to rise at the end of the 80s going into the early 90s. And then it started to catch on with artists like Janet Jackson and Whitney Houston. Belle Biv DeVoe was another big one doing New Jack Swing. So a couple years after Tougher Than Leather, October of 1990, Run-DMC released an album called Back From Hell. And on that record, they tried to kind of project a harder edge. They were swearing a bit more, you might say gratuitously. They were incorporating some of that New Jack Swing kind of elements of that into their sound, and basically kind of not being very like Run-DMC in the music. Now, the album Back From Hell would chart on Billboard, but it would peak at number 81, and it would only sell 300,000 records. 300,000 records versus the string of platinum albums that they just left behind them. And platinum, might I remind you, is 1 million or more. So they went from selling 1 million, sometimes several million, as in the case of Raising Hell in 1986, to only selling 300,000 copies of that, less than a third of what they had been doing with the Back From Hell album. Now, we did not look to Run-DMC when it came to lyrics about packing heat or talking about street violence. We already had several groups taking care of that. But here's the thing. If Run-DMC had just dictated their own new direction and sound, a significant portion of the industry probably would have followed them, because Run-DMC were leaders in the field, but by trying to chase where they thought the culture had gone and sort of visibly worrying that it was leaving them in the dust, instead they just looked worried. And they looked maybe a little desperate and maybe a little out of their depth. And the truth is they kind of were a little worried, and the pressure was on Run-DMC. When you look back at that time, Jam Master Jay owed the IRS nearly $300,000 from the year before. Run was struggling with depression because their stature in hip-hop had been on shaky ground for about a year or so, and he had begun to struggle with alcoholism. So the album and the circumstances around it were a bit steeped in desperation. But in the years to come, the group would reset a little bit, and by 1993, they put out an album called Down With The King, which would incorporate the more firmly established sort of 90s gangsta rap sounds once they had started to solidify. And the way Run-DMC would use them on that record worked a hell of a lot better, and they weren't overreaching in their delivery, and that one, Down With The King, would be certified gold not long after its release. Hey, it also didn't hurt to have a song from that on the very hot Beavis and Butthead Experience album, as well as the group's music appearing in the Beavis and Butthead Christmas special that year. So Run-DMC was back on the forefront of pop culture again, because let me tell you, if Beavis and Butthead signed off on you, that was a ticket to stardom. Just ask White Zombie. But yeah, if you haven't heard 1990's Back From Hell by Run-DMC, fire up Spotify and take it in, because it is definitely an album a lot of people don't even know existed, and you might not be ready for it. So, hey, we've talked about funk rock. We've talked about hip hop. Before we take a break, I'm gonna head over into the metal neighborhood. We're going to talk about a giant in the field. We're going to talk about Iron Maiden. That is right. What can be said about Iron Maiden that hasn't already been said by thousands upon thousands of glowing reviews going back to the early 80s? You know, when we first met Maiden, they were fronted by a man named Paul Di'Anno for 2 incredible albums, classics which are still hailed today: the self-titled Iron Maiden and the following follow-up killers. And how could you even improve on that formula? You listen to them today, they sound like nothing that's being done out there, and they retain everything that made them successful back then, 40 plus years ago. But when Paul Di'Anno leaves, what do? You lose your vocalist after 2 albums. Well, you add Bruce Dickinson to the mix. And so Bruce Dickinson takes Iron Maiden to heights they had never even imagined. He's got that soaring, sort of melodic, almost operatic vocal style. And he took what was already considered great about that band and elevated it even further. Maiden became a force in metal that band after band after band would be compared to. Iron Maiden became a religion. They became a brand, a mark that terrified parents and preachers. And yeah, let's be honest, in the Dickinson years, albums like No Prayer for the Dying and Fear of the Dark, they sometimes get downplayed by fans, as not being quite as strong as some of the ones like Power Slave or Peace of Mind. But even the worst Iron Maiden is better than some of the best of several other bands out there. So it's a matter of degrees, Well, enter a man named Blaze Bayley. So Bruce Dickinson would wind up leaving Iron Maiden in 1993. He wanted to go after a solo career. He had a solo hit in one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies that Iron Maiden eventually wound up re-recording and putting out as one of their own. But, he had tasted that freedom to go and do what you want to do as a solo artist, and that's where he wanted to go. So in 93, he did, and the band would replace him with Blaze Bayley, the singer from a band called Wolfsbane, who would actually open for Iron Maiden on their 1990 tour. Blaze Bayley did not have the sneering, gritty vocal delivery of Paul Di'Anno, and he certainly didn't have the powerful operatic tenor of Bruce Dickinson. What he did have kind of sounded like something out of Spinal Tap when you listen back to it, as I did today, working on this episode. He had a strong voice. It just didn't fit with what this band had been doing and was going to keep doing. He had a more straightforward, emotionally kind of raw baritone voice. And the first album that they put out with him behind the microphone was called The X Factor. That came out in 1995. And it kicks off with a song called The Sign of the Cross. And when you listen to that song, you think, you know what? This is probably going to work out. It finds Blaze Bayley trying to soar like Bruce, but he just never quite got there. It feels like you went to see Iron Maiden on Broadway, but the understudy was in for Bruce. It's the epitome of often imitated, never duplicated. Iron Maiden were just kind of imitating where they had once been. And it was clear that Blaze was trying to reach for, was trying to sort of fill those shoes. But he just didn't have the chops to get there. And that's not to say he wasn't a good singer. Like I said, that's not to say that he wasn't a technically gifted singer. It just wasn't the right fit for a band that had already established for 15 years kind of what they were. You know what I mean? Much of the music you hear on the album is very good. Occasionally the vocals are good. It's just the sum of those parts just never quite come together and make that whole picture like you keep hoping they will. Another album would come out with Bayley on vocals. That would be Virtual 11 in 1998. And it was just as critically panned. And when you listen to it, you can hear, man, Maiden just kind of sound and feel lifeless. They don't have the energy they used to have. It is clear they're trying so hard to make this thing happen, but you can tell even they are doubting whether they have the ability to do that. And, they just leave nothing memorable in those grooves, man. There's nothing you look back on and go like, hell yeah, I need to hear that. And if you did want to hear a couple of more memorable songs from those 2 albums, well, Iron Maiden would continue to do a few of them when Bruce Dickinson came back into the fold. So, hey, a couple of them did eventually reach the heights that we all knew they could have. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In 1999, Iron Maiden would part ways with Blaze Bayley that January. They kind of realized, the new version of the band had never really gained traction, try as they had. And Bruce Dickinson would be back almost immediately, where he has been ever since. And let me tell you, they picked up right where they left off, instantly putting out albums with Bruce that stood up to some of the best shit they had done in the 80s with him, starting with Brave New World and going all the way to the latest one we've heard just a few years ago, Senjutsu. The point is, there's plenty of shit out there to listen to by Maiden. You don't necessarily need those 2 Blaze Bayley albums. In fact, to a lot of fans, Iron Maiden just went on hiatus around 1993, and they didn't come back until 1999. Man, that was a wild time. I can't believe we didn't have Maiden for those years. Well, I wonder what the members of that group were up to for those 6 years. But hey, don't go away because we are just getting started here on WNUT Talk, talking about Superstar Slumps. I'm going to take a quick break for a few words from our sponsors. And when we come back, I'm going to have a special guest here in the studio with me who is going to help me go through 3 more bands, 3 more Superstar Slumps that you're not going to want to miss. I mean, you're probably going to want to miss, actually listening to some of those albums, but we'll let you decide for yourself right after this.
Saturday nights at 10, WNUT becomes WJAZ, hosted by the Jazzman, Cool Cat K-Roz, playing all your favorite jazz hits.
Hey cats, I got smooth jazz, I got cool jazz, I got bebop, I got modal jazz, Dixieland and swing, and you know how we swing on WJAZ.
He's even got Queen's 1978 album Jazz, when he's in the mood for fat bottom girls, which is often, but forget about that. And remember WJAZ, every Saturday night at 10.
With me, the Jazz Man.
And always streaming on demand on the WNUT YouTube channel.
Live 365 WNUT and a long road ahead. What else could there be?
But not a long wang because, it's Carl. You're back on WNUT Talk talking about Superstar Slumps today. Man, I've talked about some crazy ass shit that you probably didn't even know existed out there, and I hope you're going out and hitting up Spotify and streaming some of this music. Because some of these groups, like I said, they're massively popular groups. They're legendary groups. They've had careers that most people would kill for, but there's albums sitting out there in these careers and in these discographies that just didn't get the right attention. Or maybe they didn't get attention for the right reasons or for the wrong reasons. But to close us out here on the show, I'm joined by a good friend of ours, Paul from Connecticut. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. How are you?
Oh, man. It's always a good time when I've got you here and we can talk some of this shit back and forth.
I'm starting to sign. I think I have to sign the recurring character contract or something.
Well, speaking of signing things, I'm sure you're getting mobbed for autographs out there.
Oh, yeah.
When people hear it.
Yeah, they have to hear my voice, though. They don't see the face.
Autograph also being a band that you couldn't tie back to Whitesnake. I just want to throw that in your face.
Oh,
but
man,
hey,
stick me in the side of that one.
Talking about Superstar Slumps, I figured I needed to bring you in to close this episode out because I got 2 or 3 bands here that I know that you've got stuff to add to. You and I can have a great discussion about a couple of these. First off, we were talking about Extreme last time.
Yep.
Extreme, 1 degree of separation from Van Halen, who's the band I want to talk about.
Okay.
And the reason that I want to talk about Van Halen and I'm bringing up Extreme, you know why.
Because of
Gary Sharon.
Well, that's where it was, right?
Now, here's the thing. Yeah, everybody knows, and for years it was debated, is the Van Hagar stuff, does the Van Hagar stuff suck, blah, blah, blah. I think we talked about that last year on one of the episodes.
I'm sure, yeah.
On the greatest motherfucking episode ever of WNUT. We talked about people have finally come around on Van Hagar.
Yeah.
People finally give that its due.
Sure.
But what people have not come around on is Van Halen 3 with Gary Sharon as the lead vocalist.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you listen to the first 3 Extreme albums, there are points where you think this is a no-brainer. He sounds so much like Hagar at times.
It does sound like
classic
Hagar,
yeah,
for sure.
That you almost feel like this is a band with like paternal lineage to Van Halen.
Yeah.
It sounds like Extreme, shares the same DNA in a way.
Sure, for sure.
And Sharon should have been able to come in right behind Hagar.
He had the voice of Hagar and the charisma of David Lee Roth.
So what the hell went wrong here? How did Van Halen 3 not take off the way that people envisioned it could have?
It could have been a couple of things. It could have been the time period. It was 1998.
Yeah.
I don't think people gave a shit about Van Halen at that time.
That's true. And I'll make another point about that in a minute here, but keep going with your train of thought.
The music was a little different.
Yeah.
It's just it was a much moodier, darker album than Van Halen's used to having. And they've had some dark albums. I mean, Fair Warning was a pretty dark album.
Which is a solid
It's
record.
a solid album. It's got great stuff to it.
I listen to that one so much more than I used to now.
Yeah.
And I've come to realize how much, like how underappreciated that album is.
For sure. But this one just had some weird, moody stuff. And I think I mentioned it before on the last episode was you just end it with that Eddie Van Halen vocal album song, and you're just like, it just kind of ruined the whole album. But there's still good stuff in there, like Fire in the Hole.
I also feel like for whatever reason, Sharon wasn't performing to his register. Like he was singing lower on that record than he.
Sure, I mean,
had
he was the
been
new
doing.
guy, and he had to be. He was doing what he was told.
But they had been writing in Hagar's key for years, for a decade or more.
Yeah.
And Hagar's key is Sharon's key for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Those two.
You would think, but again, they were looking for something different. Obviously, they were looking for something different. They didn't, even like if you think about it, they put that Greatest Hits album out a couple years earlier.
Yeah.
With the two
Best of Volume 1.
And
we thought that we were about to get a
David Lee Roth songs
a
on there.
reunion with Roth at that point.
And Roth didn't sound like Roth on that
Now,
album.
could that be the thing that makes this album so reviled? At the time, people were maybe a little salty because they didn't get that reunion they thought they were getting. And so they were going to be rude to whoever the hell came in behind that.
So you got the David Lee Roth purists that went,
Right.
oh, we were supposed to get Roth back and we didn't. And then you got the Hagar purists that went, I can't believe Hagar's not in that band.
Because you made a point a couple of episodes ago when we did 6 Degrees the first time. I was talking about the Motley Crue album with Karabi, and you said if they called that album anything else, like if they
Anything
called
but,
that
yep.
Christmas, it would be Do you think that's the case with Van Halen 3? Do you think that if they call that band something different, people take to that album better?
Maybe differently. Mm-hmm. If you didn't put the VH on the cover and all that kind of stuff, maybe. But still, at the same time, some of that stuff was just too weird.
Yeah, because they kind of positioned it like it was a spiritual sequel to Van Halen 1 and 2, the albums, but they also symbolically were saying this is the third incarnation of Van Halen.
Third incarnation of Van Halen.
Because we've had Roth, we've had Hagar, and now we've got
it's
Sharon.
just there was just some weird. To me, it would have I would have thought the same thing.
Yeah.
That I heard. What I heard, I would have thought the same thing personally because I would have been like, some weird stuff in here.
Yeah. And now the question I was going to ask earlier, and I said I would wait a second, was people were already kind of shitting on Balance, which had come out in 95, I believe.
Another dark album.
And Balance is one from the beginning. When I got that record, it had just come out, and I really liked it. I loved Balance, and I still do. I think there's a lot of great... The Seventh Seal is wonderful.
Yeah.
Amsterdam is a great... People shit on songs like Amsterdam, and I'm like, that is fucking fun. That sounds like Hagar having the kind of fun in the studio that Roth used to have.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Can't Stop Loving You is one of the biggest hits on the face of the planet.
Right.
But there's just such a vibe running through this album, and I really dig it. And
Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do is a great song.
And people are so mean to that album.
They are.
They hurt that album's feelings a lot, and I feel like it's not warranted.
And it shouldn't be,
But it had already started happening. And why
they were already fighting? Yeah, they were fighting in the studio at that point in time.
Would you argue that the slump had already begun here? Maybe Balance is the start of Van Halen's Superstar Slump.
You could see that it took a little dip.
Yeah,
not a big dip, but it took a little dip because it still had the same four guys,
and very unfairly so.
And it was just right after that ultra successful For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge.
Right. Carnal Knowledge had been huge. Standing on Top of the World right now. I mean,
Pound Cake,
Run
Around.
These were incredibly
big hits.
Yeah, successful songs
and
staples on MTV.
Brighter,
yeah,
but it was also a different time period again.
Right.
1991 to 1995 was a long time when it comes to rock music.
Yeah, and a lot had happened. And here comes Eddie Van Halen with his hair buzzed off, and people are like, "What the fuck is this?"
And, who recognized him the first time you saw him?
Yeah, but he was still getting the covers of Guitar World, and he was a big deal, and people loved him.
After that, he looked more like that to us.
Yeah.
For the last, from 95 until the day he died, that's what he looked like.
Right.
But he was still really good. It wasn't like his guitar playing took a dip.
Right.
It was just, I think the songs themselves were
people
just different.
Either people wanted more of that, like, a previous Van Halen sound, even though that music was changing, they still wanted something kind of like For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, or they just had decided, we're done with this, we're moving on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it was, but something, I would say that the slump almost kind of began happening there. You were hearing the sound of it.
For sure.
Humans Being, I think, was more successful coming a year later on the Twister soundtrack than the stuff from Balance had been, with the exception of Can't Stop Loving You. That was a big radio hit that got a lot of play. But for the most part, people dump on Balance. Not as hard as they dump on 3, but they do.
Right.
I just think that, after Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, maybe Van Halen kind of was... They just had odds to overcome, and they weren't going to handle it real well. Because they weren't going to follow up 3.
People wanted For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge 2.
Yeah.
or OU812 or 5150. They wanted that.
Yeah.
And they didn't get that because Van Halen didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Eddie, I don't know about the rest of the guys, but I know Eddie Van Halen hates repeating himself.
Right. And the thing is, I was trying to kind of figure out how to say this earlier. They would sort of spin their wheels after these, not failures. I think one of them you could consider a failure.
Right.
I don't know. These missteps. They would continue to sort of spin their wheels for a while. They'd have the reunion with Hagar in like 04, 05.
Well, they were always a self-destructive band.
Yeah.
I did hear, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there was supposed to be a follow-up to 3 with Gary Sharon.
No.
And Eddie Trunk was talking about it.
Yeah.
He's always got the ins with everybody.
Yeah.
He said he's heard the demos of this next album, and it was supposed to sound more Van Halen.
I mean,
He
I
said
take
it's not-
Eddie
he
Trunk
goes-
with a grain
he
of salt.
They went back to that sound.
Yeah.
It was going to sound great, and then they got rid of Sharon, and they started going flirting with the David Lee Roth thing, and
Yeah.
they were a self-destructive band, and Eddie was like, anything that anybody said was like, hey, you should do this. He's like, you know what? You're saying I should do that, and it's probably the right move, but I'm going to go this way.
Exactly. So another band that I kind of wanted to talk about now that I've got you here.
Okay.
Who better to talk about the superstar slump of a group like Kiss than Paul from Connecticut?
Oh, yeah.
Now, Kiss, you can make a few different cases.
There were a lot of areas where they dipped.
I'm going to reserve my thoughts because, like I said, I can come at this a couple of different directions. I want to hear you. If you were to say right now what you think either started the slump, where you think the slump fell in Kiss's career.
Well, you could see with Dynasty the wheels like slip a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. Then you get to Unmasked, and it didn't sound anything like Kiss. Everyone wants to shit on Elder.
That was one of the first ones by them I bought, and I was like, what is this?
Yeah, it was like this power pop album.
It was bizarre.
It was, and you go, oh.
Because the one after Unmasked, that's where we get into the Elder, right?
That's when we get into the Elder.
And the Elder, describe
that's got to be rock bottom.
For people who don't know what music from the Elder is, why don't you take us through that briefly and just let us know what in the hell they were trying to achieve with this record?
They were looking to make a concept album. I still, to this day, couldn't tell you what the concept was.
Was there an idea for a movie to go with it, or was it just a...
I don't think there was a movie involved.
Okay.
I think it was just them making they tried to get a little progressive.
And they've got like woodwind instruments and shit on there, and
and they had like a little story behind it. There was people talking during some of the songs.
There's stuff that sounds like hobbits might be walking through the background of whatever scene you're hearing. It's a bizarre thing for Kiss to come out with.
It was like Paul Stanley trying to be as operatic as he possibly could in some of the songs.
Yeah,
they were just they tried too hard to do something different. It was a swing and a miss.
The most well-known
most
song from that album or period would probably be World Without
World
Heroes.
Without Heroes. They did a video for that.
Yeah, and they did that Unplugged when they did the Unplugged show, which is one of my favorite Unplugged performances
That's a great Unplugged
ever.
performance. I love that one.
But they went and they dipped into Elder for that, and fans were kind of surprised at the time, like, oh shit, they're doing
because it's
Elder.
a cult favorite.
Yeah.
There were people that now go back and go, the Elder's pretty good.
So you start getting some questions about what in the hell's the direction of this music with Unmasked in 80. The Elder comes out and people go, what in the hell world are we living in?
They took a left turn with Unmasked. They took another left turn with the Elder.
Yeah, but then they follow up Elder with Creatures of the Night.
Which is
one of my favorite Chris albums. I love that record.
Well, I think once they hit that rock bottom of the Elder, they went, we got to go back.
They basically said, we got to course correct, and we're going to make this right.
We got to go back and become something more.
We're going to get back on.
By that point in time, they had already lost Ace Frehley. Even though he's in the I Love It Loud video.
Yeah.
He did not play.
Yeah.
Bob Kulick played on that.
Wow, okay.
Ace was in the studio.
I know that around
Bob
this
Kulick
time,
played on.
I knew that we started dealing with some concerns about who was really playing where.
I think the funny story was Bob Kulick would lay down some licks.
Yeah.
He'd go sit down in the lounge and Ace is there, and Ace would be like, how did I do today? And Bob would be like, never better.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts on the non-makeup years? Once you get into like Look It Up and you go
the
on.
non-makeup years, I started listening to Kiss with Crazy Nights. So to me, I was big on the non-makeup stuff. Heaven's on Fire is one of my favorite songs.
Okay, that's a solid song, and I do like the title track from Crazy Nights.
Yeah. That was a little more polished, a little more keyboardy and stuff like that, but
I feel like the albums themselves, I go back and forth on, do I like this? Can I listen to this all the way through? The first Kiss album that I ever had of any kind was the Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits compilation, which was very heavy on the non-makeup years. They had a lot of the non-makeup stuff on there, and they had gone back and remixed and re-recorded some of the stuff from the 70s.
Almost like they didn't have the rights to those songs,
and
so they had to remix things and do like Beth. And
there are versions of the 70s songs on Smashes and Thrashes that I like better than the original album versions.
Okay.
But for the most part, to me, the non-makeup era kind of is a slump in Kiss's. They had some good stuff in there, but I just don't see it as the same kind of vibe that the band.
So growing up in that era, in the MTV era,
right,
you couldn't go an hour without seeing Hide Your Heart.
So there's still
Forever.
There's still great and strong response.
Let's
to
put
this
the X in Sex. Those videos were they were staples. They were like mainstream songs that they put on there.
Yeah.
In my opinion, Revenge is my favorite Kiss album.
Yeah. By the time we get to Revenge, and I might have to add an asterisk to what I've been saying, because once you're out of the 80s, once you get past, what is it, Hot in the Shade?
Hot in the Shade was 89.
I can't really listen to Hot in the Shade, but by the time you get to Revenge, I'm there. That's one of the best albums I think that came out in that period for hard rock and metal.
That was when Gene Simmons stopped making those movies.
Dear God, man. They had their shit together. He
became a demon again just without the makeup.
Yeah. It's like after the
death of Eric Carr, basically.
Yeah, once the 70s were over, I feel like they would kick off the decades with something powerful. Something they would bring the thunder at the beginning of the decade.
Sure.
And then, they'd go tinker around and spin their wheels a little bit.
And then, they start the decade with Revenge and they end it with Psycho Circus.
Yeah. So their slump is kind of a complicated one. Whether or not I like it, whether or not it's something that tickles my funny areas, it still was well received at the time. It's still stuff that makes the greatest hits compilations. It's still stuff that people look back fondly on one way or another. Right. But you can definitely say that The Elder is an album
that's rock bottom.
That is an album that a lot of people don't know exists. That is an album that a lot of people just have never heard.
Right.
That's an album that people are going to continue overlooking and not realizing is there, and for good reason. This is not one of those where I'm saying go back and check it out because people missed a gem.
No, go back and check it out. Go back and check it out. Listen to The Elder. You owe it to yourself as a Kiss fan if you've never listened to The Elder.
This is going to be like when I told you.
Listen to the shit so that you can know, so you can appreciate the good stuff more.
This is going to be like when I told you to go back and do the extreme No Respect
if I'm going to
challenge.
listen to No Respect for an hour, you have to listen to The Elder for an hour.
Oh, man. Well, before we go, we've talked about Kiss. We've talked about Van Halen. Should we talk about a personal favorite of both of ours, the boys from Boston and Aerosmith?
Okay. All right.
Aerosmith, in my opinion, and you can say what you want about, how their greatest hits and their live albums have outnumbered all of their studio output by this point.
Very true.
We can talk about, how they would coast on fumes for however long they felt like doing it.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something. They had the most consistently solid quality output,
for sure,
I think, of most bands.
Yeah.
Going back as far as you want to look in hard rock.
Yep.
A lot of people don't realize that as the 70s kind of came to a close, the quality of the albums overall started to dip. I know that Draw the Line was a bit of a shaky album, but there were some big hits on that album. Like I said, not what I'm talking about here, but by the time you get to the early 80s, the band breaks up. And they put out an album called Rockin' a Hard Place that does not have Joe Perry, that does not have Brad Whitford.
Right.
And that one is overlooked by a lot of people for valid or invalid reasons. I think it's a strong album.
It's a decent album.
But I can understand people ignoring it because it's not the boys.
Right.
It's not the five guys.
Right.
And when Perry and Whitford would come back, they'd be with the band until, let's face it, the band's pretty much over by this point. They're not going to be able to do it again.
They're not going to be able to do it anymore.
So with the exception of this one album, it was always the same five guys. And if people want to overlook Rockin' a Hard Place, I understand. I give you a pass. But I do think it's a solid album.
No, there's some good songs on there.
The one that confounds me is the one that came next. Because Jimmy Crespo and Rick Dufay, who had come in to replace those guys, they leave. And the band makes up with Whitford and Perry, and they put out one called Done with Mirrors in 1985. And I fucking love this album. I mean, this is one of my go-to Aerosmith albums.
It was a so what it was, if you look at it in a certain way, it was a jumping point to get this band back. It was never going to be. It's got great songs.
Yeah.
But it was never going to be in 1985. It wasn't going to be a chart topper.
Yeah.
It kind of gave them a little jumping point to say, hey, we're back.
It almost feels like they went back to the 70s and found some of this sound that they really needed to.
Well, they took Joe Perry's song, Let the Music Do the Talking.
Right. He had recorded that on the Joe Perry Project debut album.
Yep.
We had heard it before, but to hear all five of the guys from Aerosmith doing that song, and Steven had they had retouched the lyrics. They'd made it a little more Aerosmith.
Yeah, for sure.
And man, it just felt good.
It's a great album. It was a good jumping point, and then to jump that to, if you're down at the bottom, it's a good way to start working your way up again, because then you get to the Run-DMC thing. Then you get to
that would be the following year,
and then you got the explosion a year later of Permanent Vacation. And then to
people rightly
get a grip.
People rightly attribute that career renaissance to Run-DMC after Walk This Way. You know, Permanent Vacation was going to be the biggest thing on the face of the planet. Ragdoll and Angel and shit like that. But to this day, when they go back and they remaster the catalog, they ignore Done with Mirrors. When they do their 57th greatest hits and best of compilation, they ignore the stuff largely from Done with Mirrors. I don't know that I've ever seen any of that stuff on there.
I don't think I've ever seen a Done
their
with Mirrors
compilations.
song on a compilation.
They've got songs like The Hop, and The Hop is this song where they go into just like you're pulling up to an Aerosmith show.
Yeah.
You're pulling up to one of their gigs. Maybe it's happening at Max's Kansas City when they were still a young band. Maybe it's happening at like a bigger arena. I don't know, but it takes you through the night as the band's warming up and hitting the stage and the crowd's getting whipped into a frenzy. And you got lyrics like, you best watch out what you do and who you do it with, because you'll be kicking ass tonight with the boys in Aerosmith.
Yeah.
I mean, and you might hear that and think that's kind of cheesy, or they're name dropping. When you hear that song get to that point and it's built to that, it'll give you goosebumps to hear some of the shit on this record that people don't know exists.
People don't realize it. I think they like it enough. I remember hearing, I think it was The Hop. I used to watch all those old home videos that they made, you know, making of Pump and all that kind of stuff.
I've got the DVDs over there.
Yeah. I believe The Hop, it was put on there like while they're like showing them singing, but you don't hear them. It's just like the music over the top of it. They recognize that kind of stuff too.
Shame on You is another one where we kind of like, you know, we name drop the band and the members, and he's talking about, you know, Joe Perry and
he always Joe Perry's.
Yeah, he always, but you know, he's kind of hyping Joe Perry in that song, and he introduces his solo and lets him go.
Didn't they have they had Sheila on there, right?
Sheila's on there.
To me, Sheila was you could have thrown that one away. That was just that seemed kind of all right.
For me, it was She's on Fire. I didn't really like She's on Fire that much because it kind of seemed like I
don't think there were any lyrics other than She's on Fire.
Yeah, it was one of those like on Permanent Vacation. What is it? The movie or something? There's it's kind of an instrumentalish sort of like vibey kind of track, and She's on Fire kind of feels like that to me, and that epitomizes some of the things I didn't like about Permanent Vacation. But I mean, I'm one of those people. I'm going to tell you, I like this album, Done with Mirrors, more than Permanent Vacation. And there's a lot of reasons.
If you look at the, you know, I mean, every band has waves.
Yeah.
You know, you work your way up from the first album.
Yeah.
Get Your Wings. Toys in the Attic. Rocks. And then Draw the Line, and then all of a sudden you could just see it starting to go. They hit that crest at Rocks, and then when it started going down with Draw the Line.
Right.
Night in the Ruts.
Night in the Ruts kind of came back up from Draw the Line a little bit. I felt like it was a stronger
Night in the Ruts
album.
had a great song, and that's no surprise.
And I mentioned Max's Kansas City, that he talks about in that song, you know, being discovered by Clive Davis.
Clive Davis.
Coming to Max's to see them and you know, signs them up, takes them to Columbia.
Yeah. So but they did it again in the 80s.
Yeah.
They got up to Get a Grip.
Yep.
And then 9 Lives.
Yeah. 9 Lives was a rough one.
And then, you know, if you're just going with studio albums, then you got you got Honkin' on Bobo.
Yeah, well, we won't talk about that. But hey, I should have mentioned this in the Van Halen discussion. Van Halen ended their career with a very strong studio album.
It was
where they reunited with Roth, and they put out a different kind of Truth, and it felt like the kind of shit you used to love hearing
It
from
was
them.
a solid album.
Yeah, and Aerosmith did the same thing. I think they went back through their ideas and some of their unused
The Music
stuff.
from Another Dimension?
Yeah, Music from Another Dimension, to me, is one of the best albums I think they had done since the 80s.
And in my opinion, it was long.
It was long.
There were
but I'll
songs
take
that they could have taken off of there.
Let me
and
tell
could
you,
have had a nice, short, compact, great album. But they just spewed everything out into this album.
let me tell you why I didn't mind that. I knew at that moment.
That was the end.
I knew we weren't going to get any more.
Yeah.
Because it would take an act of God to get us to that point where they were finally making a new album.
Right.
Just Push Play, if you don't consider Honkin' on Bobo, because that's a blues covers record.
Right.
Just Push Play had been more than 10 years before. Yeah. In fact, Different Kind of Truth by Van Halen and this Aerosmith Music from Another Dimension came out in the same year. Everybody was getting back together in 2012 and putting out an album for the first time in forever.
Yep.
Beach Boys did it too. A lot of groups were doing it. But yeah, I mean, I knew that we weren't going to get more, so I was like, just pile it on, man. Give me an EP of all the outtakes.
It kind of made it thinner.
Yeah.
You know,
I
when
can
you stretch something out, you're making it thinner. If you just got like 10 songs, 10 strong songs, and put it out there and just the last punch in the face.
But as I say, you've got laid out in front of you, you can listen to 9 Lives, Just Push Play, Honkin' on Bobo, or Music from Another Dimension. Which one's going into the
9 Lives?
Really?
Yeah.
When I put 9 Lives on, I'm always surprised by how much I enjoy hearing it again. When I'm just looking at the tracks, I think to myself, there's nothing on here that would motivate me to put this on right now. And I don't understand how this album works
that way. There's no standout song, but if you put it all together, I mean, for me, if there was one song on that album that would make me want to put that out, just say, I need to hear that song.
Yeah.
It would be Attitude Adjustment.
I can give you that.
For the rest of the world, it was Pink.
Did you know that there's an entire version of 9 Lives that was recorded before the version that we have?
Without Joey Kramer.
Yeah, and it was recorded in Miami.
Yep.
When they put out the single of Pink, they call it the South Beach Mix.
Okay.
That's not a remix of the session here that went on the album that we know.
Right. It was the original.
That's the original session.
Okay.
So they recorded 9 Lives in its entirety, listened back to it and said, that's not good. We're not going to put that out. We're going to regroup and we're going to record this album again. And that's the one that came out and that we have. But there's an entire version of
I remember
this.
them talking about it like on MTV just when they were releasing the album.
At some point, that little nugget of info got locked away in the back of my head. And I was just like, I'm not going to bother accessing that ever again. Well, hey, man, thank you for joining us here on WNUT Talk to talk about some Superstar Slumps. We've had a good time today. Just me and you talking about some of our favorites.
I know.
So, but hey, you know, if you have been interested in anything you've heard us talk about or me earlier before he rolled up, you just go to Spotify and pull up some of this music, which is sitting out there waiting for you to discover it right now. And for whatever reason, a lot of people just aren't taking that initiative. But you need to, because there's some good shit on here, Done With Mirrors. And I'm telling you.
I'm gonna go home listening to Done With Mirrors.
Yeah, you really want to just, pull some of this stuff up, except for Van Halen 3, and listen to it and enjoy it. And of all things, by God, you're going to want to go to sleep tonight listening to music from the Elder. That's going to put you in dreamland. You want to talk about a world without heroes?
Well, you listen to Elder. I'm going to listen to that one Extreme song for an hour.
You are definitely going to think this is a world without heroes if you do that. Thank you for joining us here on WNUT Talk, wherever you might be listening to it. Hopefully, you're checking out Live 365 at live365.com or the free Live 365 app. You just search WNUT and we come right up. Join us next time on WNUT Talk. Hey, we're going to have a topic. I don't know what in the hell it is, but we're going to find out together, and I'll see you then.